I'm filming, and it was like it gets sucked into a vacuum of dogs, and it just disappeared. It just became part of the mass of tails. It sort of left its sort of individuality outside the gate, and then just become one of the 300 animals.
That's Paul Murphy, and he just made the most important film that you, as a rescue dog person, can possibly watch. Paros is a documentary about the Los Barrios pound in southern Spain, and Paul tells the story of a dog's journey from birth to abandonment to adoption in the most captivating way. Paros really opened my eyes to what my dog's life was like before she came to me, and it shook me. But it also made me understand my dog even more. And it also made me appreciate the work of dog rescuers even more. And I think it'll do the same to you. There's just one warning about Paros. You will want to adopt another dog after watching it. Paul calls it a dog film about people, but he is the silent man behind the lens. So with that in mind, I am very excited to speak to Paul about his time at Los Barrios, the people he met, what he thinks about animal welfare in Spain, and most importantly, perhaps, about his own dog, Ryan, who came from Los Barrios and who inspired this beautiful film. Paul, I have on my lap Tara, our beautiful Podenco, who is from Los Barrios. We adopted her, or my partner adopted her 10 years ago. She's desperate to get off because it's a hot day. She should be still used to the heat because she is from the south of Spain. But I want to start by congratulating you on making Paros. And what it did for me is it changed my perspective on what Tara has been through. And I want
Yeah,
to thank you for that, because in
it's
10
okay.
years of running Wunderdog, I've never come across a film or a story or anything that's shown me quite so clearly what my dog has been through before she came to me.
Sure.
So I guess that brings us to how you got into Los Barrios in the first place. How did you find this place?
It was by chance, totally by chance, actually. We had a dog from Portugal called Rocky, and another little dog from Portugal called Lule, and they were companions. Rocky died, and we decided to go looking for another dog. And a photograph popped up just randomly. It was amongst some Instagram, and someone had suggested that this dog needed rescuing. And this dog was called Goku, and we decided, looking at his picture, he was in a pretty bad way. Actually, he had leishmaniasis, and he'd been attacked in the pond, and so they said, look, could someone rescue Goku? So we did, and a few weeks later he turned up, and he is an amazing dog. But shortly afterwards, Los Barrios put out an SOS, and it was for a little dog called Ryan, and the picture that they put up was terrible. Um, he looked in such bad condition, and he was very skinny, and he was bleeding in various places. He just was in a very bad way. This is leishmaniasis. This is what it
Yeah.
does to dogs. Yeah. So we looked at the picture, and we looked at the ground that he was sat on, and we looked at the ground, the floor of which Goku was sat on. And it looked like they'd both been sitting together almost. So we asked them, and they said, okay, they know each other. I'm not too sure if they did, but they said that they know each other. So we said, okay, we'll take Ryan. So then they came back to us and said, cool, but he can't travel, and he can't travel because he's quite ill. And so I said, to Helen, my partner, we can't not have him because we've committed to him. So we decided to, I just jumped in my Jeep. My friend Chris came with me, and we'd been talking to Spanish stray dogs about maybe making some little short films for them, little snippets so they could use. So we took a camera by chance, And we then drove to Southampton, and then we drove the 1,500 miles down to Los Barrios. And initially, we went and met Ryan and met his foster mum, which was great because he's an amazing little dog. And then someone suggested that we visit the pond, and this was not something I'd ever done before, and it wasn't something I was expecting. So we drove out without Ryan. We left him with his foster mum, and we drove to Los Barrios, and we were driving down the road, and the closer we got, I could hear the dogs barking, and we drove up the avenue to the gate, and we could hear them barking, and then we got out of the car and we walked up to the gate, and there was all these little faces, and all the little tails were wagging, and I turned to Chris and said, "This is terrible.
Mm.
We have to do something about this. We got to tell the world about this." So we spent a few hours there just meeting the dogs and meeting Edu, and Richard. We met a few of the characters who are in the film, and it was that moment really I decided to make the film. So, and I spoke to Edu and said, "Look, this is what we're now thinking about doing. Would it be okay?" And they were very nice about it. I mean, I say make a film. It wasn't so much make a feature film because I had no idea how to make a feature film, but it was more about the idea of just filming something so that we could actually at least, notify people that this is actually happening. So,
Yeah.
so that's how it started. It started with Ryan, actually. Ryan is the catalyst for Perros, because if it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have gone there. And yeah, so
Incredible. You call it a dog film about people, and it is the people who are telling the story. You don't have any narration over it, but tell us how you conducted these interviews, because there was a bit of a barrier, wasn't there?
yes. So once we started filming, I realized that things just things were happening every minute. I mean, literally every minute. If it wasn't a dog that was being dropped off or abandoned, it was the volunteers struggling with what I call the tidal wave of animals, and so I started to realize quite quickly that this wasn't a short form film, that this actually could be something bigger, because there's so much to tell. There's so many aspects of the story that I couldn't fit into a short film. So the problem I had was I couldn't speak Spanish. So the only way that I could really make it work, I didn't have an interpreter because we hadn't gone there to make a film. Two, I didn't have the funds to make a film. I mean, it's quite expensive to do these things. So I decided to use Google Translate on my phone. So I would ask it a question in English, and I would play it back in Spanish because it would translate it, and this, Edu or Richard or whoever would respond, and quite often they would respond at length.
Yeah.
I would have had no idea what they were saying. I was just nodding and conducting the interview, but I had no idea what they were saying.
Yeah.
And that was the first trip. That was obviously really we stayed there for about 4 days or 5 days. When we made the decision to film it, we extended our trip and stayed longer.
Mhm.
And then I drove Ryan back up to London and brought him back here, and he gets sort of mixed in with my crew. And then I did employ a translator, a young Spanish lady, and she did translate a portion of it for me. And she called me and she said, "You've no idea uh, what, what these people are saying." Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
it's yeah. And you call it I think well you call it a film about people, which is so apt. And I think one of the beautiful things that we would probably not have appreciated quite as much in a written interview, which is why it's so beautiful that this is a film, is because you let the people really speak, as you say. So sometimes, in an interview, things come out very late. You just let the camera roll, didn't you? You just let
I
them say
did.
everything they wanted to say.
I did.
Um,
So
Yeah.
and in a way that was, in a way, me not understanding what they were talking about softened the relationship between me and them, because
Yeah.
they could just talk. And I mean, Rosalia could talk, and it was great because what she was saying, I didn't need anybody to tell her story,
Yeah.
because these people
Yeah.
could talk for themselves.
Yeah.
And, Richard, goodness, I mean, and what was nice about Richard was the initial translation that I had done, it was translated well, but it was a little bit blunt. Yeah. What I discovered afterwards when I went back myself to the translation was that a lot of the nuances and the poetry that they were injecting, and the repetition, Richard kept repeating himself. And I thought, that's him. That's part of who he is and how he explains things. So I brought back into it all the repetition and how he would describe things. And in a way, not understanding Spanish at the time, because I wasn't able to interrupt them. I just let them speak. And I think that actually made it, in a sense, because
Yeah.
I call it a dog film about people, really, because, yeah, I mean, the subject, of course, is dogs, plural. Um, but really, these people are doing what they're doing to save these animals, and in a way, their story is also the dog's story, because it's their influence on the dogs and what's happening in the dog's life. So I wanted
Yeah.
to give them equal balance. So it's not a
Yeah.
film about dogs. It
Yeah.
is a film about both. So
What I found striking was, and this is not something we just see in Spain, this is something we see in other countries with large stray dog populations as well, is that we have people, let's say of a certain age, some of the ladies in your film could easily be grandmothers, let's say, but they are talking about the people in their country saying they are cruel to animals, they're abandoning them. And then you want to just say, but here you are doing incredible things. You are one of the good people. So it's not that we are going from a population that had absolutely no interest in dogs, because otherwise you wouldn't be here.
yeah,
So one of the reasons why your film gave me a lot of hope was that these charities often go out and do education and talks in schools, but there are these people already there of sometimes a certain age throughout all social classes who are helping.
it
And I
is the
think that
case.
was really important to point out, because people
Mhm.
have this, categorical view that everybody in Spain treats their dogs badly, and that's blatantly not true, is it?
That's exactly it. I mean, I purposely opened the film in a particular way, which is to show that dogs are loved in Spain just as much as they're loved in any other country. When you look at the population of dogs in Spain, the majority of them are actually pets and living in probably in good homes.
Yeah,
You know, I think culturally there probably isn't a country in the world that doesn't have aspects of their culture that you know reflects badly on animals. I mean, we in the UK we run greyhounds around a track, and we do things that we over the years have culturally believed that it's okay to do this, and
yeah,
and so when you look at the Spanish people, and especially in the south, even those people who I met, who you could say are the cause of the problem, let's say the farmers and the hunters and so on. Maybe less so the hunters, we'll come back to those, but definitely that generation of farmer, for example, who doesn't know any different
yeah,
to other than to protect his property with an animal that barks if someone enters their property. And what I found was they weren't bad people. It was just it was just sort of something attached to history, is what they've always done. They've always kept dogs in order to protect their property.
mhm,
It's sad that there are cases when they go to the next stage where the animals are not looked after very well.
yeah,
Um, but there is a generalization a lot of people make, that Spanish people are bad to animals, and I would say quite clearly you're correct that not all Spanish people are bad to their animals, and it's a minority, but unfortunately, where one person can treat the animal as a tool and not want to have it castrated for whatever cultural reasons, it only takes that one person to have one dog, and that one dog will then repeat itself and have 8 pups, and those 8 pups will have, and then it
Yeah.
mathematically will extend. So even though it's a minority, it's a dog to procreate, and that's the sad thing about it. And I think what I found culturally was um, the big thing is castration. That was the one thing that everybody talked about. It was the one thing that when they talked about people who didn't want to have their animals castrated, it was generally because of uh, they felt they were taking something away from the animal. You know, the female should be allowed to have pups, or it was the thought that it was being cruel. You know, it was hurting the animal to have it castrated. So a lot of people decide not to have their animals spayed or whatever, on the
Yeah.
basis that that's what they have always done and that's how they view the animal. So
It's almost a misguided love, isn't it? It's they don't want to hurt the animal and therefore they're hurting the animal.
yeah, I mean, you've seen the farmer in the film. He described that his dog, even though he was deciding to let it go, he was calling it a beautiful animal, and he was patting it on the head, and he was, he and I met the man. I spent time with him because obviously I had to condense what we shot, and he wasn't a bad man necessarily. He
Mm.
just that was just his thing. We do it in the UK. You're allowed to have a guard dog in the UK outside your property, and you only need to have a roof and food and water, and that's the only thing that dog needs to keep it within the boundaries of the. So yes, you're quite correct. It is a minority, and I think it is changing. And you mentioned there about education. Yes, one of the nice things that was happening during the period that I was there was we got to visit some colleges with Edu and some schools and so on, and we seen how they were trying to educate, as Edu called it, the new generation. Yeah, and
Yeah.
she was really putting out, as she said, we put all our hope in the new generation. Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah,
There were a few scenes in the film, and I know you don't want to give away too much, but there were a couple of scenes that really stuck with me and that I wanted to put to you to see what you remembered about this. And the first scene that I wanted to mention was a little black spaniel being handed in at Los Barrios.
yeah,
The dog was abandoned or relinquished by its family, and it just broke my heart. And Richard
it's a
talked
tough one.
as
Yeah.
well. What was that moment for you? What was that like?
That was the first moment. That was we had only that was actually the first trip. That was when I just left. We had just left Ryan back with his mom, with his foster mom, and we'd driven to the pond, and we'd stood around the gate for a little bit, and we were discussing it. And I didn't I didn't actually see it happen myself, but apparently a car pulled up, and they set the dog and on the pavement outside the dog pond, and I think they might have spoken to someone, and whatever reason they gave, they gave it, and they drove off, and they left this little amazing little black spaniel. And that was the first that was the first moment really that I sort of, that was tough. That was a really tough one for me. I was filming, and in the film you see um, it's quite a strong piece of film because Richard's speaking over it, but we're seeing Edgy trying to do what she's doing. And afterwards, I had to go and take some time out. It was a very, very difficult. That's part of, that piece of footage is part of the first act. And the first act, I have to show the world the problem. You can't, I've split the film into a 3-act structure. So the first, let's say 30 minutes of the film is very much about describing Los Barrios, describing the people, what happens, who does it, who's responsible. And it's impossible to make a film about dogs and not show really what the problem is. And so there are a few, I can't say, there's definitely a few emotional bits in there. And that one was actually a very tough moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It broke my heart. And it was such a moment that could have happened anywhere because a black spaniel, they exist anywhere in Europe. It wasn't even one of these things again that we're saying, oh, in Spain they're abandoning the galgos, for example, in droves. It could have happened in Battersea, it could have happened anywhere. And just to see this abject terror in the dog, it just tore me to pieces. But I think at the same time, just that little bit of film just is so powerful to speak to people who are even thinking for a second about abandoning their dog. I mean, it was so hard.
absolutely. You
Yeah.
see, I started filming shortly after Brexit. Um, I mean, I filmed for over a couple of years. I mean, it was quite a long process because I would fly out and fly back and so on. And what we were finding each time we went, that you imagine the dogs that are abandoned are dogs such as Podencos and Galgos, because they're the working dog. They're the dogs that it's a bit like greyhounds here. When it's finished running, they get rid of it. But in actual fact, there were dogs coming into the pound that were like that little spaniel. They were house dogs, they were pets, and we found out afterwards that actually a lot of people who had to leave Spain and go back to the UK because of Brexit actually were responsible for abandoning these dogs. So there were all sorts of dogs in there. There were poodles, there were, you name it, there were dogs that you would not imagine to be in a dog pound of any sort. I mean, look, I don't mind actually saying, because it sounds like that. I don't want that little bit of footage to put anybody off, because the one great fact about that little spaniel is that about 4 days after it entered the pound, and I'm filming, and it was like it gets sucked into a vacuum of dogs, and it just disappeared. It just became part of the mass of tails. It sort of left its sort of individuality outside the gate, and then just become one of the 300 animals. But within a few days, someone, I think it was actually Edu again, she was such a great woman. She put the word out, and somebody in Malaga who was very much into spaniels took the spaniel, and it only spent 4 days there. So,
Oh God, that's such good news. Yes. Go little spaniel.
yeah, so that
That is,
dog was actually was rehomed. So
that's
don't
really
let it stop you watching the film.
no. And I think, as I said earlier, I think what Paros does is it really shows us who already have a rescue dogs, what life is like in a pond. So I think if anything, it makes you want to get more dogs because you want to get all these dogs out, right? So
I, I'm stood
I
there.
think Paros will lead to a lot of adoptions.
I hope so. I really hope so. I mean, look, if you think about it, there are only 300 dogs there. I've been researching the world of dogs, because obviously I wanted to market the film, and there are literally millions of people. I've never known a subject so big as the world of dogs. And if you think about it, there's only 300 dogs. I say
Yeah,
that obviously they're coming in constantly, so that number's either it's fluctuating. There's more that come in than there is that leave. So, but if 300 people watch the film and decide to adopt, or even if to be honest with you, even if one person watches the film and decides to adopt the dog, then it's a success. Yeah,
yeah,
it's done something. Jorge talks about it. He said, "Look, I hope you enjoy watching the film, but at the same time, I hope you do something about it.
yes,
I
yeah.
hope you actually see the benefit of bringing an animal into your life, because they change your life. And if it's something that you've made a very, very conscious, you have to make a conscious decision. You can't just, like Richard speaks about in the film, you can't just get a dog for any old reason. It can't be, it can't be as a present for somebody, or you've really got to consider adopting an animal and everything that goes with it. If
Yep.
it's a case
Yeah,
that, if it's a case that a lot of people say, hey, we can do this, then it would be wonderful. Yeah.
I hope so. The second scene I wanted to discuss, we've already touched on, and that's the Mastin mummy who has puppies. The rescuer Harriet drives past the farm where this young mother is sitting outside, I think, with her pups, and she convinces the farmer basically to give up the dog. But there is a lot of back and forth going on. You already mentioned the farmer and the guard dog aspect of things. You also mentioned sterilization, but it all comes really together in this one scene. And then uh, to put the icing on the cake, almost, you have Harriet's children who are so kind with these puppies and packing them up. I just wanted to spend another moment on this scene, and I wonder if it's as iconic as I'm making it out, because that for me was all of Paros in about 1 minute.
I mean, in a way, that farmer is a classic example of. We mentioned him earlier. He is the older generation. He's what Harriet is talking about when she talks about people of her age and older who uh, see dogs as something different to how the rest of us see dogs. And I let that scene run. It's quite a long scene. It's normally I wouldn't normally it would be much quicker because you want to cut, but that whole moment where she's talking to it lasts about 4 or 5 minutes because it's quite profound to see a man standing there deciding, actually, you're right and I'm wrong. These pups, even though my grandchildren like them and everything, they do need rehoming, and and as much as I hate giving up my dog, I'm gonna do it. So that was a tough thing for him to do, and Harriet did ask him, are you gonna cry? And he said no, because he's a farmer, he doesn't cry. But I got the feeling he was emotionally charged. I think inside he was choked up, and
Yeah.
that's so we keep coming back to that story, obviously, because we follow about 5 dogs in the film. And I should say that uh, the way that I've structured the film, it's very hard to make a film over 2 or 3 years or whatever, however long it took me to make it. It's very hard to make a film and tell the whole story about what happens with one single dog, because if I followed one single dog, it would be, it sort of didn't make sense in terms of photography and everything. So what I very loosely decided to do was chronologically order the chapters of the film as though it was one dog. So even though multiple dogs and multiple people tell the story, it starts to some extent with the idea that a dog gives birth, and the dog is abandoned. The dog is picked up off the street by the likes of Jesus and Diego, who are the dog wardens, and then it's brought to Los Barrios, and either it's extremely lucky, like the spaniel, or it's not lucky, and it
Yeah,
spends its
most of
life
the
there.
older ones end up sitting around, right? I think they're about
Older
two
black
years.
dogs, yeah. There's only maybe about 3 dogs that stick in my mind, because with so many dogs, they do become a massive movement, and it's very hard to sort of see the dogs as individuals. And I think that's what happens when people go there to choose a dog and say, right, we're going to rehome one. It quite often is the cuter, the softer, the dog, but the bigger dog, that big dog that's maybe just as soft, but it stood at the back of the kennels. Those are the dogs that get overlooked, and they
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
get rehomed, and they do spend their lives there, and they die there.
We've already spoken about the people of Spain and the mindset and the generational shift. And we can't talk about any of these things without also talking about politics and about enforcement. In 2023, there was a huge shift in Spain. I remember reporting on it, where it looked like galgos and podencos, or the hunting dogs, were going to be protected like pet dogs, and pet dogs were also going to get better protection. In the end, just a few days before that bill was meant to pass, the hunting lobby got in there once again, and once again got galgos and podencos excluded from this law. But what struck me about Perros was how little faith the people had in law enforcement across the board. So I'm wondering what your point of view is on legislation and on enforcement on the ground, and whether people still believe that there is any justice for animals.
So there's a mother and daughter in the film, and they talk quite frankly about situations that they have in their village. And they talk about this idea that it's very much, again, culturally, it's very much the village against them. If they decide to, let's say, tell the police about a situation, about a person or an animal, that it actually, more often than not, it actually works out quite badly for them, because um, the police turn up, and for whatever reason, whether they don't have the resources or the interest, or um, whether they don't care. Nothing ever seems to get done about it, and quite often, I mean, even it's not in the film, but even Edu talked about a situation where they had to more or less take the law into their own hands, because the pound had been broken into and the dogs had been stolen, and some dogs were stolen, and um, they had to basically go and get the dogs back themselves, that the police weren't interested, and they had to go and make a deal with the people who stole the dogs. So in a sense, I know there has been a change in legislation, possibly since I finished the film, or even maybe just before I finished the film. But there is still the hunting lobby, I believe, in Spain is very strong, like it is in the UK,
Yes.
and they are voters. They do vote for politicians, and when politicians want votes, the biggest number of people who, in this case, who they don't want to upset is the countryside alliance, as we call it in the UK, or in Spain, the hunting lobby. So they don't, and I think that legislation has, if I'm not mistaken, has deemed that the Podenco and the Galgos are essentially working dogs, or their tools,
Yeah.
and this is how they're explained in the film. I mean, Ryan is a full, he's a proper little Podenco, and these hunters, they will starve them. They will make sure that they don't eat for a while, so that when they go hunting with the enthusiasm to catch something. So yeah, so I think that the hunting lobby, as it's explained in the film, seems to be the biggest culprit when it comes to the abandonment of those types of dogs. And I think it's the hunting lobby who are probably the strongest voice when it comes to lobbying government. And
Yeah.
I had this idea, and I'm very, very keen to actually follow it through, which is to take Perros, and to take a projector, or maybe get one in Madrid when I'm there, and actually go to Parliament and say, look, let's have a cinema afternoon, and maybe have some of these politicians come and listen to Rosalia and Richard and Edu just describe the problem, because you know a lot of people have contacted me about the film saying they had no idea, they didn't know. And um you know one of the things that I didn't really want to touch on too closely on the film, because it's a municipal pond. It's owned by the council, and it's only by the sheer will of whoever the volunteers were at the time. I don't think Edu was involved, because I think she joined a little bit later, but whoever made the decision to go to local council and say, look, we're going to take your pond over if you're okay with it. And that's what they did. The council agreed to it, because like a lot of the municipal ponds in Spain have a horrible name, which is they're called killing stations. And the reason for that is because because there are so many animals, and because you see the guys pick the dogs up off the street. That was happening every day. So there's a real tidal wave of animals, and if people didn't claim the animal, if the owner didn't claim it within 10 days, the dog was put to sleep. And so the
Yeah.
the volunteers decided that they would do this, and this is what they've done. And Eddie was quite keen at the time, to tell me that there had been no, that they'd stopped it. They'd managed to actually, Richard actually explains it in the film, but they had actually stopped this activity. And I don't know what's happening in the rest of Spain at the moment. I know there's still probably lots of ponds, and there might even still be lots of municipal ponds. I'm not sure, uh, but yeah, this is what was happening. So I believe that year in, year out, things are improving. I think year in, year out, things are definitely improving at Los Barrios. They've got themselves a swimming pool, and when I started filming, they only had a single gate, which meant when you open the gate and you have 40 animals, the chances are that some of them ended up outside. They've now got a double, like a sort of a air,
Yeah.
some sort of block that they can. So things are improving, and without getting too involved in what happens at the end, I think the changes have been definitely for the better. But what I do know from people who have contacted me is that the numbers of dogs entering Los Barrios, and I'm sure other ponds, it's not decreasing. It's continuing, and
Yeah.
it's for lots of reasons, apparently, from cost of living to hunters, and everything in between. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think especially with the hunting issue, because the hunters get rid of their dogs at the end of the hunting season, and that's somewhere between 40. to 100,000 dogs. I mean, there's just such a huge number of abandoned animals across the
It's
country.
terrible. It's really terrible. And you know, when you go there, you're driving around and you see these packs of dogs on the street. It's you know, I actually struggle with the thought about going back because I'm not as tough as those guys. You know, I've decided to try and use my skill, let's say, as a filmmaker to do my bit. But when I go to, you know, I've got a friend in Portugal, and when we go there sometimes, I find it really difficult because you want to pick these dogs up. You
Yeah,
want to go and rescue them or bring them home, or you know, you want to do something about it. And
yeah.
I'm only glad that there are these volunteers who give up everything. I mean, they give up their lives. I've got three dogs. I know what it's like to look after three dogs, and especially when they get a bit older as well. I mean, it's a handful. So 300 dogs is crazy. You know,
It never ends. Yeah.
it's a tough job. Yeah.
Paul, you said earlier about the scene with the little black spaniel that you had to take some time out, and you've just explained as well that you're not as tough, and I completely get that it takes not just toughness. I think it's a special kind of person who works in pounds and shelters. What has this film done to you as a person and also professionally? Because you used to work in advertising, now you made a feature film. How has this film changed you? Is this going to put you on a new track, maybe?
Well, it definitely changed me. That's for sure. I mean, I already had a sort of an instinct towards animals. It was something that when I think back over the years, I do remember having this sort of second thought about animals. And if I seen something, I try to do something about it. But the intensity of making Perros, the actual being there and being inside this dog pound with 300 beating hearts and wagging tails and everything. And what it did, I think it just polarized the problem for me. It just said, look, this is such a big problem. When I came back and started to make it, I started to look then at other aspects of how we look at animals and how we treat animals. So me and Helen here my partner started to look at rescuing foxes, and we have rescued multiple animals. And then it pushed on into any sort of an animal. We've rescued all sorts from hedgehogs to pigeons, and so yeah, so it has had a sort of a profound effect on me. And then I started to look then quite closely about what's happening with our own culture because we're not good. You know, we you know we assume that we're great with animals, and Spain is very different to us, but we're no different to anybody else. We're quite happy to run horses over jumps that they can barely get over and they break their necks or their legs. We're quite happy to chase a fox through a field or, you know. So I started to look at that aspect of it as well and made some shorter form, you know, little possibly more related to advertising for people like the League Against Cruel Sports, for example. And we've made films for them, and we've just recently been involved in trying to change. I think I did actually. I helped change what's happening in Ireland with the view towards hunting and so on there, with short form little films. And what that's done, it's made me realize that because we all understand movies, you know, we all understand that media, you know, we watch Netflix, we're all scrolling on Instagram, so we understand reels and so on. And it got me thinking that actually it's a great way to enter into people's ideas about animals by you know coming up with ideas and portraying them in a certain way. And so moving forward, I found filmmaking, even though I didn't know really much about it, and I've had to learn everything. Helen's helped me with the script because she was great to be able to bounce off and show things. But there isn't anybody else involved in this. This is just me. But that learning curve has meant that I'm thinking, actually, I can use this in the future. You know, we can make more films, and we can maybe even focus on other aspects. Maybe even look at going back to Los Barrios and maybe making something to do with, if it ever happens, the moving of the pond. You know, so yes, it's a natural progression, and I've taught myself a natural progression from photography, but it's a progression I've really enjoyed on the basis that photography, as much as I love it, is it's two-dimensional.
Yeah.
It's really the viewer and the image. Whereas with filmmaking, I can move people with sound or I find just making the film with, I don't know, just bringing sounds into the film, bringing music into it at the right time, and um, cutting
Yeah.
at certain points where, so all of those tools that I have within filmmaking are tools I didn't have with photography, and I find it quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So with the league, which is obviously involved in a lot of live issues at the moment, including, as you already mentioned, fox hunting, grass
yeah.
hunting, um, horse racing. Which topic at the moment is closest to your heart, where you think this is absolutely outrageous? I would love to start filming on this tomorrow.
Maybe it's not a topic actually, because I think for me, any form of animal abuse or any use of an animal for human pleasure is bad. But what I have come to find is that for Edu and Richard and Harriet, there are people in the UK who have got the same enthusiasm, and but they're doing it, you know, um, they're doing it for the love of animals, but they're doing it under the radar, and they're doing it every day, just like the guys were. So, for example, I found we rescued a mouse. I thought, what are we going to do with the mouse? And I found the rodent man, and all he
Amazing.
does is he takes in rodents, and his lounge room has all of these rescued rodents. And then we found the two ladies who take in pigeons, and so there's this infrastructure of rescue here in the UK that is trying to counter all of this cruelty.
Yeah.
This idea that we've coined phrases such as, vermin. I mean, who makes up the word vermin? That's a form, as I call it, speciesism. We decide what animals we do not agree
Yeah.
with, let's say, and we decide which animals we like, and we make that decision in the same way we do with humans. And that, so for me, it's a form of speciesism, and there are animals who suffer because of that.
And I
And
think even within the speciesism, it's just so insane. We have a small
yeah,
shop around here, um, which sells all sorts of homeware and also dog and pet food, and they
yeah,
sell mouse traps right next door to mouse food.
yeah. I
It's
mean,
just insane. So who
who
it's not
who
even
makes
one
these
species.
decisions? Yeah,
Yeah. So what do you want? Do you want to love a mouse and feed it, or do you want to,
this is
tempt it
it.
with a piece of cheese and batter it to death, basically? It's
Yeah, I mean,
insane.
people love to look at a butterfly, but they'll put their foot on a black ant. Or in a way, we're very lucky to have people like Spain is very lucky to have people like Richard Ned and Rosalie and so on. We're very lucky that the likes of Greenwich Wildlife, who are our local rescue, who we would mostly take animals to, are working around the clock, and this is what they're doing, and they're trying to counter this. So yeah, so what has it done for me? It's opened my eyes. That's what it's done. It's made me realize that we look at dogs and cats as pets, and we get appalled when we see bad things happening to them. But equally, we should be appalled at our cultural activities that sort of make it okay to take your kids to see a dolphin in a pool somewhere, or
Yeah.
go on holidays and think it's cool to get on the back of an elephant. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but I get quite angry about the whole thing, because again, it's this imbalance.
So, Paul, if you ever decide to come out to Cornwall, where I'm sitting at the moment, you must visit the Flicka donkey sanctuary, where they've got
Oh wow, that sounds good.
dozens and dozens of donkeys. And one that we are sponsoring now is 31.
Oh wow.
She was rescued from Romania, where she was used obviously to pack and carry things,
Yeah.
and her back is really arched. And my favorite part of that story is that she arrived there in fall. So she gave birth in the sanctuary.
Oh,
And
did she? Oh
apparently,
wow.
her son, she's very protective of her son, because I'm guessing she had so many faults taken away from her. But her foal apparently is a bit of an arse. So the son keeps on living with the mother in the same sanctuary, but he keeps on also sometimes coming over to her and kicking her. So even within a sanctuary, there's some dynamic,
Oh,
isn't
that
there?
that I didn't
Yeah.
realize it actually. That's new to me actually, the idea that you can actually bring, you know, bring a donkey from overseas.
I think there's a lot of humor and a lot of warmth as well within dog sanctuaries, or in general within animal sanctuaries. And a lot of sanctuaries or people that I've met in them also extend their heart to all other species. I mean, I think most shelters will also have the odd horse or pony or donkey because they go into, let's say, a hoarding situation and they come out with whatever animal needs help.
Yeah, I think that's the case even in Los Barrios. I mean, they definitely. I sort of very specifically, kept the subject. Obviously, given the title, I've kept the very much the subject as dogs, but they have a cat section, and I know that it was spoken about due to the floods. Someone did mention that in previous floods they did have to take out the larger animals, which some of them were horses and some of them were. So they must do that as well. We didn't
Yeah.
see that, but they must do that as well because it was definitely talked about. Yeah.
I think a lot of the time people are talking from dogs as an entry drug. Perros and dog welfare in general sort of seems to be almost this gateway towards a much bigger world of animal rescue. Like, you're now talking about people who rescue mice or pigeons and
Of
things.
course. Yeah.
But very often it seems that we come towards the topic of animal welfare through the dogs. Do you think that's fair to say?
I think that I think a lot of people will actually probably find their love for animals quite early in life, because maybe their parents had a dog or maybe they were allowed to have a rabbit or something. And I think, you know, look, there are very few people who don't like animals. I'm talking to them about the film at the moment, and there are literally thousands, well, there are millions, potentially, uncountable numbers of people who love dogs. So it is a minority. The people who are actually shouting the loudest and changing policy and changing government minds. I'll give you an example. I got involved in the campaign in Ireland to, as it was about to hit Parliament as a vote. I got involved in the campaign to try and change the minds about hunting there because unfortunately it's still legal. And what I discovered is that 82% of the people of Ireland want to stop hunting. They would be prepared to vote against it. And only 2% of the population have ever been involved in hunting. So it's a very, very tiny minority of people who actually, let's say, are for one, if you agree that it should be banned, there's only a very, very tiny minority of people who are actually the culprits. And I think that's the same everywhere. I
Yeah.
think that the majority of people are probably going to say they love animals or they like animals, but it's still that tiny little group means that there are a lot of animals who actually are in difficulty.
Last question. You mentioned the floods. We don't want to give too much away from the film. It is a very tense scene towards the end, but also your film is helping Los Barrios move.
That's
Can
correct, yeah.
you put that into context for us? What's happening there and what is your
Sure,
film hoping to achieve?
sure. It's a municipal pond. It's council run. Probably they built it with very little money. Um, what they didn't realize was, or maybe they did, was that they actually built it on a floodplain. And it has a river that runs quite close to it. And this river is prone to flooding and it's becoming worse because of climate change. And when it floods, the the authorities have a decision to make because they have some gates, I think there is something mechanical that happens, and when the water gets to a certain point, they have to make a decision to open the gates or to do something. And when they do that, the surrounding countryside floods, and unfortunately, it floods into the dog pond, and that has meant in history there has been some terrible things happen because it was described to me that um, dogs have died, dogs have been washed away due to the river, and I described this in the film obviously as I was sat here with a half finished film, and it was I'm thinking how am I going to finish this film? because I've no money, because there's no budget, and I don't know how to use the software. Approaching Christmas of 2024, I heard that I think the pound flooded again, and I just thought, wow, I got to do this film. I have to basically try and help by making the film, and then in turn seeing if the film can be purchased, and if it can be purchased, then we'll. So it took me a year and 4 months to do the edits because I had to teach myself, but it was always the thought of the flooding, and because we're July now, but 5 months time it'll be in my head again about going into the winter and the potential of flooding again. So we just put everything to the side. I borrowed some money, um and I put a post on my Instagram last May, I think it was the 23rd of May, saying, this is it. I'm diving head first. I feel like I'm at the bottom of Everest. I'm at the foothills, but watch this space. So
Amazing.
yeah, so it took a year and about a year and sort of a couple of months to make it. It only got finished there in whatever it was, the back end of May. And yes, I describe what happens in the film, and yes, it's quite dramatic. But I then, when the film was complete or nearly complete, I contacted Los Barrios, and I contacted some of the volunteers there, and I just said, look, this is what I'm doing, and can you tell me what's happening? And they were able to tell me that, in fact, they had managed to raise £250,000, and they had bought themselves a piece of land that's on a bit higher. And they got some bulldozers in, and they put a fence up, and they've actually got this plot of land. And I think they then went to an architect who drew the plans. And it's a very expensive thing to build a dog pound, because you've got to build the shelter, and it has to be over a large area when you're talking about so many animals. And so they've reached a point where they have planning permission, they have the land, they've got the enthusiasm, but what they don't have are the funds, and they've got a pretty good idea of what it's going to cost, and it's not cheap. So I said, look, what if I jump on board with my film? I don't know how it's going to do. It could do really terribly, but maybe people will go and watch it and maybe buy it. So then I spoke to Spanish stray dogs and said, look, what if I ring fence from the purchase price an amount? We haven't quite decided, because there's lots of costs actually in hosting but we're deciding that there will be a good percentage of the cost of the film will go directly to Spanish stray dogs, and in turn will be ring fenced then to build the pond. Los Barrios does have, like most of the dog pounds, they do have contributors through donations and charities, and overseas charities. So the dogs are being fed, and they're things are happening for them. So I purposely wanted this to be for the dog pound. People have been buying it and watching it, and they've been gifting it, which is quite cool, because you can actually, if you know somebody that loves animals or loves dogs, send them the gift. It's just over the price of a pint of beer. You could just send them an hour and a half's worth of dogs. As I keep joking that 101 Dalmatians only has 101. Yeah, we got 300.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
Paul,
So yeah.
thank you so much for your time. I hugely appreciate it. And
Sure.
congratulations on your film. I can't wait to see your next one. I'm sure it'll once again change minds, even if it takes some time to make.
Yeah. I'm in good company, because I heard once that Stanley Kubrick he took 10 years to make each of his films. So so I do have some ideas about what we might do next. All I can say is, look, if you want to, if you like dogs, go and watch it. It's not all good in terms of emotion, but the most of it is actually quite uplifting. And when I'd finished it, I felt that I'd done some justice to both the dogs and to the human beings there. That if the world watch it, I think they'll get a good idea of what's happening. So.
And if you have an adopted dog, I think you appreciate its life, what it's been like before it came to you, so much more. So I think especially for us who have rescue dogs, it is such an important film. As I said in the beginning, I've never seen anything that quite brings this one close to me, this issue of life before the adoption. So thank you so much for
That's,
opening my eyes. I hope there will be lots more people watching Perros. And I'm pretty sure it will lead to a lot of adoptions. And please cuddle Ryan from me. I know he's been to the vet yesterday, and
yeah,
also cuddle
Ryan,
other animals.
unfortunately, not to end on a sad note, but Ryan, he's not very well at the moment, but he's in good hands. And the, I mean, Ryan has been through everything. He's had his chemotherapy twice for leishmaniosis. He had a piece of metal we found inside of him. He's had his tail amputated. He's had gastroenteritis twice, E. coli just a few months ago. This dog has been through, and yet his tail's still wagging. So
See, that's a happy note to
yeah,
end on.
that's a happy
The
note.
waggy tail.
He's
That's
he's
all we want
he's
for Ryan.
yeah, he's a great dog. So yeah, rescue a dog. It's the best thing you'll ever do in your life.
That is the perfect ending to this episode. Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate your time.
No, and thank you for having me. Yeah.
I really hope this episode inspires you to watch Paros. You can watch it on parosthemovie.com. It costs £8.99. And as Paul explained, proceeds will go to Spanish stray dogs and to Los Barrios to help rebuild the pound on higher and safer ground. And if you're interested in adopting a dog from Los Barrios, Spanish stray dogs is your first port of call. In the next episode, I will be speaking to Emma Slavinsky. She is the chief executive of the League Against Cruel Sports, an organization that Paul has actually worked with as well to make films. Emma is an experienced campaigner for animal protection, and she was the director of policy prevention and campaigns at the RSPCA until last year, where I actually met her for the first time when I was interviewing her for Wunderdog magazine. Emma and I will be speaking about Keir Starmer's legacy for animals and the many current issues, from dog racing to dog fighting, from fox hunting to animal testing. There is so much to discuss right now. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe to wunderdog.substack.com, where all my posts and my podcasts now live. You can subscribe for free, of course, or you could support my work, which I would really appreciate, by becoming a paying subscriber. That way you also get access to our chat community, as well as the occasional exclusive events. Until next time, please cuddle your dogs for me, and thank you so much for listening and watching. Goodbye.